Welcome to the Dr. Mary Louder podcast show, where we explore the messy, magical, and deeply human journey of healing. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Louder, a board-certified osteopathic physician, an accidental shaman, and a lifelong student of the human experience. Together, we're going to talk medicine, wellness, and culture in a way that's grounded, perhaps maybe a bit cheeky, but always from the heart. And don't miss Gadgets, Gimmicks, and Gotchas, my reoccurring segment where we lovingly call out the fluff and highlight the stuff that actually works. So grab your favorite brew, coffee, matcha, or that mysteriously green smoothie and settle in. It's time to get this party started with a strong dose of soul medicine. Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Dr. Mary Louder podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Louder. Today, I'm in conversation with the genomic nutritional pioneer, Amanda Archibald. And we're going to be talking about Menopause Decoded, what your genes have been trying to tell you. Hot flashes, cold truths, and the genomic map to midlife metabolism. And we're going to talk about the gut to hormone axis, how functional genomic testing can give us actionable steps and insights in how our DNA interacts with our diet, stress, our microbiome, events that have occurred in our life, and how when we use personalized testing, we can unlock clarity and confidence and real healing, not just for menopause, but really for our longevity. But we're going to discuss how menopause doesn't just creep up on us, isn't just a blast, but it literally has been the decades in making. And we're going to talk about gadgets, gimmicks, and gotchas. That's going to be a segment where we're going to call out the things and common missteps in genomic testing and the things that actually work, because that's going to be the gadget. The gimmicks and gotchas, not so much. So we'll understand how menopause is decades long. That doesn't mean it's suffering from it, but how it's the buildup to, how the genomic patterns shape our metabolism and our metabolic symptoms associated with menopause. We're going to learn about what an estrobolome is, and that's the microbiome and how it relates to estrogen, and why the MTHFR gene isn't just the whole story. So stay tuned to a great episode that you're going to hear as I'm in conversation with Amanda Archibald. Welcome. Well, welcome to our podcast, the Dr. Mary Louder podcast show. And today we're diving into something with a very special guest, Amanda Archibald. And Amanda and I have known each other for a number of years. So it's lovely to see you again, Amanda. And it's good to be back in conversation again as well. So
always.
We're diving into something that touches every woman, whether she's 25 or 65 or 45, because that's menopause. And we're not going to talk about it the way that most people do, however. So we're going to be positive disruptors within our system, because this episode is about decoding menopause through the lens of genomics, nutrigenomics, metabolism, and the decades that lead up to it. Now, that's a different thing. So maybe we could call that the new menopause. Everybody's talking about the new menopause, which I think is the old menopause and the only menopause, but I think we'll get through this. So, Amanda, I want to list you out as a trailblazer in the world of culinary genomics and someone who I'm honored to collaborate with here today and explore a deeper, more data-rich stories that's really written in our biology. And I love how you decode this. This is going to be a great conversation. So welcome today.
Good to see you again, my friend.
Yes, it is. So, the thing about hormones is that they just don't go haywire in our 40s. And it's a culmination of decades and biochemical and genomic conversations that have occurred in our life over our lifetime, even beginning in our teens. And that's not random. It's not like, oh, look at me. Went off the deep end with my menopause. It's been building for years and decades. And it's built into our genetic blueprint that we can understand. And when we understand it, we can reverse engineer to better health. And, looking at what a hormone is, it's a chemical messenger. The main molecule is cholesterol. So we have to be careful not to attack cholesterol. Cholesterol itself might even be a hormone. I would submit it that is based upon its characteristics. Yes. And
Yes,
Amanda is nodding. If I could
I
hear
am nodding. Yes, yes,
exactly.
yes.
So we've already begun disrupting the system here by talking about it this way. And the hormones they're produced by the glands. In women, estrogen comes from the ovaries. Progesterone comes from the ovaries, testosterone does. Cortisol comes from the adrenals. In men, of course, we've got testes, and that's where the testosterone comes from. And we commonly call them gonads, is how we refer to them in an undifferentiated way. But testosterone for men leads the way, and estrogen for women leads the way. But here's where it gets interesting because our genes influence how well these hormones are made, activated, and cleared and how they function. And they're not doing it in a vacuum. So we just assume it's estrogen and progesterone show when there's so many more things. And that's what we're going to go into. Menopause is a mirror. So I want to hear your thoughts on why that might be true and reflecting back on the genomic activity and life's experiences. So we've talked about this many times, Amanda, you and I, over the years, and genomics and nutrigenomics and how we see this. So I'd love for you to share what excites you most about this topic as we begin to dive into it.
The topic of menopause or the topic of genomics? Or
Genomics
yes.
and menopause, both. Let's see how we can bring these together.
Yeah. You mean, genomics itself, this incredible field of the study of the human genome, which to me is the study of how we're built, because genes direct how we're built. The directive of operation of the human body, I guess you can argue. But when we look at the intersection of genomics and menopause, we have a whole different, a much sharper lens on the whole topic. And I think that's what's exciting about it. And just you saying, menopause has been building for decades. It's so true. And I would even say, knowing you, Mary, too, it was been building before we were born. Because our genes reflect our ancestry, but they also reflect the experience of our ancestors and passing that information down through the cells, right? And that affects our genes and how we show up in life, which is a whole other conversation. But
Right.
that's what excites me,
Yeah.
that our genes are storytellers, and menopause is one of many stories our genes can tell.
Right. So menopause isn't random, is it? It's not like I just had bad luck of the draw or my hormones went haywire. There's really a coding and decoding of this, isn't there?
Absolutely. And that's what we can see. That's what's exciting about the topic is you can we don't want to head it off at the pass, but we can see how to steer, well, men and women, but in this case, we're talking about women, how to steer you up until and through and out the other side, because we can see that in genes and how they're informing the biochemistry and how we can support that. So that's very exciting to me.
It is, yeah. So if we reframe that and this is a reframe that I believe every woman needs to hear. It's not a cliff you fall off of, ladies. It's not toes over the edge, here we go, free fall. It's not a surprise attack or a sudden hormonal ambush. It's a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the visible tip of an iceberg that's been really building for decades. And like you said, I believe too, even before we're born, because we do see that. And then what we see in midlife, which is what we hear all the time, the weight gain, sleep disturbances, mood swings, hot flashes, those aren't menopause problems, but they're the accumulation of metabolic and genomic patterns that have just literally built upon one another.
Mm-hmm.
So here's where genomics becomes the game changer. And as you mentioned, Amanda, that we can understand certain genes regulate how we metabolize estrogen and how we process cortisol. And even how we detoxify, which I think is the key point for
That's the key point.
it really is, because
It is.
it takes the mystery out of how to prescribe hormones for women, bioidentical hormones for women. Um, and so talking about these genomic pathways, they can be modulated with food and lifestyle. this is exactly what you do 24/7, 360,
Hmm.
and every 4 years, 366, right? Um,
Yeah, that too. Yes.
and the genes, the test that I use looks at 22 different genes, just looking at, at hormones and hormone balancing, 22 genes,
Hmm.
biochemical pathways. So let's dive into that a bit more. And I want to lean on your expertise here.
Oh, oh.
What
Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So
All
let's
right, first question.
yeah. So let's look at, when you look at and you've got a client in front of you, when they come to you and they're looking at menopause, they're having some hot flashes, night sweats, they're having some insomnia, mood swings. Just give me like the top three things you're going to look at to tell them when you're looking at their genes, why that's important, and how that food comes in. And when you're looking,
Yeah, and I don't know if we use a variety of tests, but hormones is its own huge bucket, which we're going to focus in on. But as I like to say, we can do whatever we want with hormones, but if we don't get the fundamentals of the cell online, which means if we're not helping your fundamental cells put up the best defense, we call that managing oxidative stress. If we don't get a process that we call methylation in line and optimized, it doesn't matter what we do with hormones. In fact, if I were to work with a doctor, which would not be you, who were to prescribe hormones for our midlifers, as I like to call them, and we haven't optimized methylation, then we run somebody into a brick wall. So we can, and we'll get into that. But the bottom line is, regardless of what the symptoms are, because that's what we're paying attention to. And obviously, my scope of practice is not prescribing. That's yours, Dr. Lauda. Mine would be to steer someone to do my work, but to steer someone saying, I really feel that you need to investigate hormone replacement therapy or some kind of support. I cannot send that individual over to a physician who doesn't understand the basics
Mhm.
of optimizing cellular function and methylation and what detoxification is and how genes will direct or determine that process. So you can see where I'm going to is I will definitely look at the hormone piece, which we'll get into, but nothing matters if the fundamentals aren't in place. Right. So those are the biochemical fundamentals. But the other piece, which is huge, is what the environmental fundamentals, sleep, stress, trauma, empty nester, putting kids through college, what have you. So we can fix anything potentially looking at genomics or genes. I can see the patterns and plug the pieces in. But if your foot is still on the gas pedal, and you're not sleeping or you're in a bad relationship or whatever, these environmental pieces, those are the fundamentals that are really a key part of any intake with any individual. So I kind of kicked it back to you a little bit on
Yeah.
that one, Mary, because we're going to go deep into the detoxification piece, but
Yeah. And
hopefully,
so the third one would also be up your alley, which is nutrition.
well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So cellular function,
yes.
environmental, and nutrition.
And nutrition and the genes are what tell us how to optimize the nutrition. I mean, you've got your basics, right? So, but actually in genomics, there are no basics because each person's pattern is a little bit different. There are food fundamentals, but how we tweak your food path is absolutely based on how we read your genes, which is brilliant, right? Some people, for detoxification, we need to push harder on magnesium or vitamin B6 or what have you. So we remove this. Just do this and you'll be fine, because for some people, estrogen clearance really demands a higher amount of things like folate or B12 or magnesium because we're reading the genes and what the cofactors are. That's Mary. She's sticking her hand up. Yeah.
That's exactly me. And so, and 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 the neat thing about that is when that's presented to a patient, it removes the guessing game.
Mm-hmm.
It removes, well, that seemed like a good idea at the time. And it also removes, hey, I heard this really cool thing online by this person, right?
or on a podcast or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so, but to be sure, our podcast tells the truth, right? So,
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We are telling the truth because we're reading DNA.
right. And your story is right there in the
It
DNA.
is.
Um, and so I think that that's really important. The cellular function, which is the biochemistry and methylation, which we'll talk about because that's going
We
to come
have
up in
to.
one of our fun segments here in a little bit. The environment, how we sleep, what's happening, what are our relations like, the toxicities therein, and trauma that occurs, right? And then foods, nutrition. So if we look at when we say genomics, it's not just about genetic testing in the traditional sense, like do you have a
Hmm.
mutation? Are you missing something? Is something been put in or something extra replicated? And we're not just talking about ancestry reports either, because that's
No.
not exactly what we're doing. We're looking at the function of the genes and the function of the human genome overall and how we know that applies to biochemistry. This is really the root of clinical medicine at its heart. And when I was in medical school, we didn't exactly have this yet, but we sure, and it has taken a long, slow pathway to catch up, even. I think it's about 40 years for something to sometimes really take hold in medicine, I've heard. And that's a long, long time. And many people are, stuck in that wait period or way station waiting, you know.
Hmm.
And as you mentioned, the detoxification. Let's go to detoxification in relationship to menopause and why that's a key component for a woman to understand before we just start giving a bunch of pills, a bunch of supplements, or a bunch of prescriptions. Why is that so important?
Because it's the body's waste management system. It has innate intelligence that can be befuddled sometimes from your genes that can slow things down or move things out rapidly. But if we don't get rid of the byproducts of living, which is
Yeah.
essentially metabolism, pharmaceuticals, or anything from the environment, the physical environment, that basically adds like sludge in the body, and your body will work harder and harder to get rid of it, or it will, worse still, Mary, it will sequester it in adipose tissues. And then guess what? You listen to something great and you say, it's spring, it's time to detox, right? So then you amp whatever the latest protocol is. And it can be very, very good green drinks, by the way. There's some beautiful products, but some people's detoxification systems can get really jammed up. And when we push the latest, greatest product, it can really actually put people into quite a stressful situation for the way they're built. And genomics allows us to see who's going to get into a quagmire and who can just walk through this. And that includes, menopause too. Some people's genes hormonally and from a detoxification perspective have given them no trouble throughout their life. And so you can just turn on the faucet and out drains all the junk and the gunk. But for other people, not so fast. And that's what we can see in DNA, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah. And that is how, when I got into this, I was presented with a stack of a genomic report that was very much a lot of raw data by someone who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And
Hmm.
they said, I don't want to have a recurrence. You're going to help me figure out how to not have that. I'm like, I have no clue. And as I dug into this was way back like in 2017. And as I dug into that, I began to see the person's story right there in the
Hmm.
gene as it was written. And we could,
100%.
yeah, and we could then what I call reverse and what everybody calls reverse engineer out of there and stay clear of what was going on. So detoxification occurs in the liver and a bit in the intestines. I always say make sure that the colon is moving really well. You don't want to be constipated and then try and push things or pull things through the liver because that would just so not be a good idea. That would be very
Exactly.
painful.
You have to kind of drain this one. You have to remove the stopper in the sink
Right.
to drain the swamp, right?
That's right.
And then you can turn the liver on, which is, we're a lot of times we're doing things in the reverse. And even nutrigenomically, when we're titrating up very targeted information like polyphenols, which can target very specific genes, we don't do that if there's dysbiosis at play. We don't do that if you're saying, you know what, when I eat this, I bloat, or I'm having reflux. And like, wait a minute here. We're starting right there. You can put everything else back on the shelf. Because we have work to do to unstop the sink. Your body is telling you there's a reason. And of course, that can happen during menopause too, which we should talk about, with the vagus nerve a little bit and what is going on there and why some women particularly really struggle with changes in their digestive tract. And here they are trying to detoxify because they've been told you have to do that, but they're all stopped up and they're like, what happened to me? So we should probably talk about that too, because it's tied in, right? All these pieces.
Well, let's go there right now. Let's go right to the Vegas. So what happens in Vegas never stays in the Vegas.
No, it goes all over your body. Sorry, people.
Exactly. It goes everywhere. It's the vagabond nerve
It
is
is.
really what it's meant to be. And that's where it got its name. So let's go there. What are these women experiencing? What are you seeing? And what's the
What
experience?
I am seeing, Marion, it's absolutely fascinating. I had a key case with a woman this morning. It was just an amazing case. But when we all take advantage of serotonin for most of our life. I always say, this is our feel good balancing hormone, and it doesn't work for everybody. We can see that with aberrations in genes. But when you look at how the body builds serotonin, which it does naturally, but there are some genes that get in the way. One of the kickstarters, a major kickstarters, aside from vitamin D, happens to be estrogen. So what does serotonin do? It puts us in a good mood, right? It helps us balance mood. It impacts our heart rate, so cardiovascular function, but it also induces peristalsis, right? Yeah. So that is really interesting to know. So when we remove that primer on how we produce serotonin, there's a number of things can happen. We can suddenly experience ourselves differently in the mirror, saying, I'm not the person I was like 2 years ago. Some women really feel different. That's what I'm seeing, is that I never used to be like this. It must be menopause. Well, no, it's just a hormonal change. Or maybe you don't have the nutrient sufficiency, or there's a genetic inability to produce serotonin. So serotonin, we know, is also impacts our appetite and satiety. It can modulate that. So what is happening? So I'm going to finish with one other thing, then go back to that because I think it's important. So let's say we're losing some of the fuel or the gas to make serotonin. Well, serotonin is also upstream from melatonin.
Mhm.
So when you only half fill the tank, where do you think some of the sleep challenges come from? And it's not just melatonin, but you may have a reduced ability to naturally produce melatonin, which helps us sleep.
Mhm.
So there's this cool part here. We always go off on a tangent, but this is
Right.
so cool.
Yes.
So we think about weight gain, sometimes that happens, and there's so many reasons why. Changes in digestion potentially, fluctuating serotonin in itself can impact sleep. But you just heard me say that from serotonin, we can make melatonin. There's some genes involved. Well, melatonin, one of its jobs is actually to keep insulin at bay at night so that the body can go into autophagy, so it can help with the cleanup business of what happens overnight, right? There's something brilliant about Chinese medicine that we've known this, but never been able to put it together. So melatonin, when it's higher, keeps insulin at bay. When it's lower, insulin can come out to play. And so we can see when melatonin is reduced, maybe our insulin is kind of pinging all over the place. You don't want that, because guess what wakes you up at night? Low blood sugar,
Right.
right? It does. So we can
Yeah.
put a CGM on and you'll see it. So all of this is all these pieces coming from serotonin. But the other thing that I discovered teaching clinicians this year, not discovered, you kind of go back and remind yourself in the science, that a lot of people, and we see this with kids too, with ADHD of all things, sometimes we're treating them for the dopamine pathway and it's really serotonin. A lot of women will complain of increased craving, particularly carbs. I don't know if you see that, but
Mhm.
some of my women will that I see, and they're craving carbs because they're trying to make serotonin. One of the ways you make serotonin is you use the base molecules tryptophan, which you find in animal products. But to get that into the brain, you have to actually sequester carbs. So let's put this together. So tryptophan is a molecule that crosses into the brain, helps you make serotonin in the brain. It's pretty important that the body does it. The things that get in the way of getting tryptophan into the brain can be other proteins. And the way we get rid of them is we eat carbs that forces the body to produce insulin. Insulin will then take those other competitive proteins and shove them over into the muscle so that you can get tryptophan into your brain. So the carbs are the body's way of saying, I need to make serotonin. Please get that other competitive proteins out of the way so I can get tryptophan into the brain and make serotonin, and we can all breathe again. So
Right.
it's pretty complicated science, but every single time I see it, what's wrong with my cravings? And it has nothing to do with leptin and ghrelin or aberrations in those genes. It's literally the body saying, I've got to find homeostasis. I've got to get back to calm. So there's a lot in serotonin.
It is. So the majority of serotonin is housed around our gut.
It is, yes, and it's different. Yes,
Okay, so that's the gut associated lymphoid tissue that's around the intestines.
yes,
Is part of the microbiome metabolome, the gut to brain, gut to skin, gut to heart,
yes.
gut to hormones, access that we always talk about, which is really where the action is.
Hmm.
So what you're saying is that is it the serotonin from the gut that then gets translated up to the brain because of the competing proteins?
So what it is, and there's two genes we look at, TPH1 and
Mhm.
TPH2, tryptophan hydroxylase 1 and 2. And forgive me for not checking my science right before I
Yeah.
jumped on here, but one of them targets tryptophan into the brain. So that's the neurotransmitter, the mood modulator, right? I think it's TPH2, and don't quote, we put it in the show notes,
Yeah.
that is what is produced by bacteria in the gut that acts as the hormone, right? That then targets the vagus nerve, which will then release acetylcholine, and bam, then we have the benefit of the vagus nerve being one of the many benefits. So one is a neurotransmitter.
Mhm.
One form of serotonin produced in the brain that I just described acts in the brain, and the other one from the gut acts systemically in the periphery and targets the vagus nerve.
Okay.
And different genes, right? So we have to
Yeah.
read them. And a lot of times I've seen the issue is with the gene in the gut, not in the brain. So we have to clinically really think about that. How are we going to help this individual? Is the issue, is it coming from the brain or the gut or both?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
different genes.
Different genes, different functions. Now, and to
Yes.
be sure, when we look at these genes, they function by either turning on higher, go higher, or turn off.
Yes.
And so then there's multiple factors how they even function.
Yes.
This is not, so one of the things, this is not an easy topic. This is not easy for clinicians to figure out. This is not easy for physicians to figure out, practitioners to figure out. Now, I'm going to say something here that it could be controversial, but I don't believe it is. In general, people are down on what they're not up on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I'm just thinking about serotonin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we think of opinions, clinical insights, ways to practice, how to care for patients, when a patient walks in to talk to their physician, clinician, provider and says, "Hey, I'm concerned about this. I'd like to do genomic testing." If the physician, provider, practitioner is not up on this, they're going to be down on it.
Yeah. Bingo. Because
And
it's not easy.
yeah, and so they're going to hear answers like, "Well, that doesn't matter. You just take this one size fits all." No, it doesn't matter how your body detoxifies, which occurs in the liver, small intestine, large intestine, and kidneys and lymphs. So here, all of a sudden we're expanding, right?
Right.
But hear this very clear, listeners. It does matter. This does matter. How you remove toxins from your body determines the keys to longevity.
100%.
Yep. And it is important. It is understandable. Your story, and you can become the hero of your own story by understanding that. And so it's finding the people who know how to do this. So don't give up. You may have to change who you're seeing, who you're working
Mhm.
with, but don't give up. Keep trying to figure it out. So I think that that's just really, really important. So let's
Mhm.
jump back into the gut because this is
Yeah.
where things become,
Went to the brain. We need to go back to the
yeah,
gut.
yeah, we just left the brain. We're going back to the gut, which is really the second brain, but there you go, right?
Kinda. Yeah, it is.
It is. Now, there's a beautiful but often overlooked concept called the estrobolome. Have
Mm.
you heard of that one?
A half. It's
Yeah.
more your world than mine, but 100% because we can see that.
Yes. And so that's the collection of the gut bacteria that help metabolize estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And if that system is imbalanced, and that's going to probably have some influence with our tryptophan and serotonin, whether it's
Yes,
due
it
to
would.
antibiotics, stress, poor diet, other factors, vagal nerve influences, right? Our ability to eliminate the use of estrogen is compromised. So our
Mhm.
detoxification is compromised.
Yeah, because you get caught in a constant recycling circuit.
Yes.
Yes.
And we see that in partly in when we do a Dutch test, and we see that in phase one, when we've got literally pi sitting there, it looks like a pie structure we look at as a graphic, and the blue section is enlarged. And that's that recycling aberrant estrogens. And that goes down through one of the phase one detoxifications, which is strongly influenced, pushed back on by the metabolome. And the way through that is changing diet,
Hmm.
fixing the gut, healing the gaps in the gut, which we call leaky gut, which is kind of a sloppy term, but it sure makes the picture look right.
Hmm.
And when we begin that work there, before we even look at replacing hormones, we can
We have to.
then get that the as I call it the pump prime the patient ready to receive hormones where they can really begin to work for them on their behalf.
Exactly.
And I find when I do that, I don't have to prescribe high doses. I can use topical versus oral.
Oh, yeah.
I can use things that don't have a huge pressure on the liver. And I can use things that when we use small amounts, we get the benefits of estrogen. And one of the things I love about estrogen helping women and why it's so important for us to use estrogen long term in women is heart health. It's the number one killer of women.
And you can see it right there.
Yep. And the
Hmm.
blood vessels, the lining of the blood vessels work and function like a hormone, the glycocalyx. It's a long, fancy word for saying hormones influence the lining of my blood vessels. And it's
So why
primarily,
would you not make that available for women who are living longer and decaying from the inside out if they don't have the opportunity to have this conversation with their physician?
I think it's a lack
Right?
of knowledge. I honestly think it's a lack of knowledge, but I also go one step further, and I think it's a lack of curiosity.
That's interesting. Yeah. It's safer to stay in your space
Mhm.
than to go the extra mile. I mean, I can't imagine practicing without genomics because it's your blueprint of every
Yeah,
single person who walks in the door, right?
right.
And we're able to read it to, it helps us prompt questions. So, we're talking about hormones. So a lot of times I can look at the structure of the genes or how the patterns that appear to be coming from the genes and ask questions about, so when you were 22, how was your periods?
Right.
Or is there a history of endometriosis or PCOS in your family, right? Or heavy menstruation? Now, it's not, I can't fix that, but I can certainly let that individual know you need to have this conversation with your provider. I mean, it's
Yeah.
that clear, and usually we're right on.
Yes. And I can point to spots in my life cycle when things changed.
Mm,
And I can delineate exactly what happened before and after that,
Yeah.
and
Because
how my health changed as well.
mm-hmm.
And the way my genes are, thank you, mom, thank you, dad. That's a therapy session. Uh, honor thy parents. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll honor you. I'll honor you by going to therapy.
Yeah. But you talking about how important estrogen is. I mean, and maybe have a conversation that there are some individuals that, you have to use maybe biomimicry or something else because of their medical history, that this may not be an option. But what I've seen in my own life, and you know this, Mary, because you saw my medical records way back when, is when I was in Boulder for a number of years. I moved to a part of the Midwest, which is not where you are.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get my hormone replacement therapy re-up for 2.5 years. The physicians were going off the women's, the frame, whatever that long,
The
the women's
women's
health
health,
study,
the women's health.
and also ACOG guidelines. And they said, no, no, no. When I got back to Colorado, I had lost 10% of the bone mineral density in my lumbar spine. Now I managed to rebuild that, which is, by 25% in 2 years. And it's not just that from estrogen, but estrogen is such a critical signaling molecule in the bone for osteoblasts, so to rebuild and prevent the remodeling of bone, but also to the cardiovascular piece that you mentioned. As soon as I was put back on estrogen, and I'm active, you know how I eat, and I'm an active cyclist and all the things every day. My LDL and my ApoB, which are markers we look at, just plummeted. I mean, how could my LDL be 141? It was unheard of. Bam, within 6 months, no, 3 months, because we retested, everything went back to normal limits because estrogen sensitizes the LDL receptor. So
Mhm.
it helps us clear,
Mhm.
what can be very sludgy for the liver. And anything the sludgy for the liver is definitely injurious to the vasculature, to your point.
It
So,
is. And it's interesting, and I don't know if you heard this, but we won't tangential down here, but I want to just put this out there for you to think about. I've seen studies where we're finding insulin receptors on bone. Bone is
yes.
by insulin. And so, looking at the insulin sensitivity, another avenue for sensitizing insulin receptors genomically can also be through nutrigenomics, even through the GLP-1 medicines. I think we're going to
Hmm.
see a difference in bone density, and we're going to see an increase in bone density in the women who are on those medications because we're sensitizing insulin receptors again.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But,
Yeah.
and yeah, and the TCF7L2 gene is directly implicated with a GLP-1 activation, which I find amazing. So
Yes.
that would be that insulin blood glucose connection. We geeked out there.
Yeah, we did. And
we
so
went we went
that's for
geeky.
the extra credit. Who wants extra
Extra
credit?
credit,
So,
sorry.
all right. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break here, and we'll be right back with our next segments coming into finishing on the gut, the genes, and the hormones, that connection. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. Hi, Dr. Louder here. This podcast is brought to you by Mycovim. It is my functional mushroom brand that I've developed. And the power of the functional mushrooms is that each formula, we have 5 different formulas, they play a unique role in your health. Reishi, which calms and supports restorative sleep and energy. Lion's mane, which sharpens focus and nourishes the brain. Cordyceps, which boosts energy and stamina. Turkey tail, which strengthens immunity and gut health. And chaga, which is a powerful antioxidant protection. Rooted in science, I went to the literature and figured out what doses are important, what blends, and what mushrooms. Crafted for balance, so they work together. And made for life, they're easy to use and take, gentle on the body, but you do feel their effects. So you basically put the tincture on a spoon and down the hatch. Doesn't have to sit in your mouth. It's not homeopathic. It's literally a liquid formula of functional mushrooms. Rooted in science, balance for life, Mycovim. it can be a game changer to help you in your steps towards wellness. Okay, and welcome back to our metabolome, estrobolome, metabolism, menopausal genomic podcast. That was like a mouthful. And what I want to go into, Amanda, is your specialty in nutrigenomics.
Mhm.
What does that mean? How does that apply to a patient, a client? What do we need to know about this that is so important? Because your work is vital, it's revolutionary. You've had work in hospitals and medical systems across the world, and that's connecting with chefs and food and different things. But what does that really mean? Share with us some of your journey about your specialization in this world.
Yeah, so nutrigenomics is really how we can look at how a gene will respond to very targeted nutrient information, or more clearly, we will use things like bioactives or polyphenols in food. So, what is that? Or in substances. So, these bioactives or polyphenols, example would be apigenin, which you find in parsley or actually in chamomile, also in honey, believe it or not. No, chrysin is in honey and chamomile. Chrysin, so honey is a natural sweetener in the Mediterranean. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
But we're using information from food that is non-nutritive. And we fire that at genes through a prescription, through a nutrition prescription. And what we're actually doing is we're getting these genes to get up and do their job. So if they're slackers, we can fire them up. We're also trained to know that some genes are targeted by what we call a transcription factor. So it's a master switch in the body. And depending on what we fire at that switch, it's like shrapnel. We can hit a whole bunch of other genes to do their work. So for example, when we're looking at estrogen or sex hormone detoxification, because they all pile into estrogen, right? In the end, estrogen is like in front of the door, but everything piles in there all the way through the pathways. So a key to detoxifying estrogen when we get into the second part are these genes. We'll name them GSTM1 or GSTP1, and SOD, COMT, right? What else is in there? There's a whole host of
Yeah,
genes.
MTHFR and some.
Oh, MTHFR, yes. So 3 of the 4 genes we just mentioned, if they're slackers or if they're sludgy, I can fire sulforaphane at them. When I say fire, I can build that in as via food, but oftentimes at our work is it's a much higher concentration. And we know that will kind of open up these genes to do their jobs. So instead of us saying, take this supplement, which is full of a bunch of stuff we may or may not need and can be expensive, we're very, very strategic because you can get a lot of return on ingestion, as I say, with very little information from food. So we're working with these polyphenols. They're at minimal concentrations, but you have maximum benefit. So nutrigenomics is the field of understanding not only how genes function, but how we can coax them, through the environment, which includes nutrients, food, and, the emotional environment. We can coax genes to do their job. And that's what's brilliant when we're looking at estrogen or sex hormone detoxification. Depending on your patterns, we know how hard we can push with certain information and how hard we cannot. And that's the brilliant specialty of nutrigenomics. And yeah, that's the work I've been doing in hospitals and training chefs and, of course, training clinicians around the world as well.
And so what that looks like to the patient, to the recipient, is a certain type of food on your plate,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's specific food. Sometimes, as I say, the gears are a little rusty in the body. And so we'll add in a higher level of a supplementation, very strategic. Supplementation could be just using omega-3. It can be a high polyphenol olive oil, which is what I often use. It can be a pomegranate extract. And we use these almost like condiments that we sprinkle onto the plate we built for you to push the body's teeth, to get the
Yeah.
gears of your biochemistry to grind together. Once they're oiled and they work, you're
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
We streamlined you, and you can go back to food with a little bit of additional support. But if you're taking suitcases full of supplements, then that defies physiological logic and it doesn't align with your genes. That's called guesswork versus precision work, which is what we do with nutrigenomics.
Yeah. So, the parts of the food, it's not going to be the carbohydrate, protein, fat.
Mm-mm.
That's the macronutrient. We're looking at micro and or the other components that are within the I guess it would be within the body of the food
Yes.
that
Uh-huh.
signals the genes.
Yeah, they're resident molecules in food. So we think about what makes sweet potatoes orange. Maybe beta carotene. That's an
Yeah.
example of a molecule that we might use. But yeah, these molecules we're using are often like invisible molecules. They're part of the makeup of it. They'll be in plants, so
Hmm.
pretty much resident
Yeah.
only in plant food
And herbs
versus animal.
and herbs, I would
And
think.
yeah, by plants. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Herbs and spices are the most nutrient dense foods on the planet, covering everything,
Yeah.
proteins, some with fats, right? Yeah, of course, fats, carbohydrates, but these polyphenols and even like B vitamins, it's incredible when you look at herbs and spices under a microscope, nutritional microscope. They are just this truly abundant source of every nutrient you could possibly need. So that's why Indian cuisine is amazing. Different forms of African cuisine, they're just so resplendent in natural medicine.
Hmm. That's fascinating because that is some of the areas where we have poverty, some of the areas where we have um, food challenges. And
Yeah.
yet,
Oh, yeah.
and it's got some of the densest nutrients in the spices and foods that are present on those continents. So the irony there is not lost on me. That's kind of interesting.
It is. I mean, if you think of the fundamentals of cuisine of Indian or Thai cuisine, I mean, they start with making a blend of something, right? I mean, every
Right.
Thai kitchen has their mortar and pestle, maybe not called that, but that's how they start their cuisine is
Yeah.
crushing and grinding or macerating to
Yeah.
marinate, right? What's ours? Put it in the fryer.
Yeah. Air
You know?
fryer. It's on the counter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, it's interesting because as spring is coming around, I have this great, I've been filling up with Greek herbs, which is interesting. And I would just like to report that my time resurrected itself in the garden. I'm taking that as a metaphor. And
Yep.
and it came back around, and I'm like, I'm ready to use it. It's just robust and beautiful this early in the season. And there's so many things that I put that in that I'm going to add
Oh yeah.
with it. But
And it's interesting when you look at the Mediterranean herbs, because a lot of my work is researching which is the best of the best, which is the most robust signaling herbs that we know about. And you
yes,
think about parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme plus oregano are just incredible resident talkers, internal talkers to your genes. I mean, they're gene whisperers.
yeah,
And just like an interesting fact, if you're going to choose oregano, the Mexican oregano, which is different from the Greek or
yes, yes.
Mediterranean, has a much louder voice. It's a much louder gene whisperer than the beautiful Italian or Greek
Well, that's interesting.
oregano. Yeah, it's interesting. And we're just measuring the polyphenol
Yes,
volume, in these herbs. So it doesn't mean to say you don't buy Italian. I buy Italian oregano all the time. So
yeah. Well, I have both in my cupboard, Italian and Mexican oregano.
yeah.
And interestingly, saying that when I use Mexican oregano, I actually feel really good. I put it in a lot of soups and stews.
And it's a different flavor too. It's
It,
a much
yeah,
brighter flavor, louder,
it
right,
is.
from a culinary perspective. So yes.
And it actually resonates very well. I mean, it just feels like a very good spice.
Isn't that
So
amazing?
that's
Yeah.
that's really, really fun. Okay, now we're going to go on to our favorite segment here called gadgets, gimmicks, and gotchas. Now, a gadget is something that's useful. A gimmick is, yeah, and a gotcha is like, whoa, stay away. So that's really what this segment's about. And we're going to pick on genomic testing. Okay. And I'm going to pick one company. I'm not
Ooh.
like picky about them, but there's a company, if we use a company that has a blueprint report with it, and it's got really good curated information. And calling it a gadget, if we look at a genetic test, the keys that we would want, knowing as a consumer, is that when you get that report, when you get a genomic report, when you have testing done, there's things that provide multiple genes, right? It's not one gene or one SNP, as we call it, make a genomic mishap in a person's life. It's multiple genes working together across the spectrum within the body. So when you get a genomic test, and there's a few companies out there, you've got to make sure that they're looking at polygenomic resources,
Mhm.
polygenomic reporting, polygenomic understanding of explanations. So that's going to be the gadget that's very useful.
And I would say with that too, the reality is that these companies, you would not really be able to buy these reports yourself. They
That's
should come from your provider. Or if you get this report and you can't read it, it's a pretty good report because there's a reason that most reports are not sold direct to the public because they can be very misleading, or you can come away with completely the wrong understanding and totally spend a bunch of money on supplements of foods that don't work with your unique genome. So the
right.
gadget is polygenic, I agree, and usually obtained through your provider who's
Yeah,
trained, who you've asked if they're trained too.
exactly. And so,
Yes.
right. So the gimmick then in the middle is sitting there in those one gene tests,
Oh,
MT.
yeah. I call them line item tests.
Yes, I've got the MTHFR and I'm going to die. And I'm always like, yeah, well, you're going to die and you're going to die with it, not from it.
You're
I
not from it. And by the way, it has a couple of siblings. So glad you just found
exactly.
out about one of them. It's like, I'm sorry to tell you, I also have the MTHFR. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I agree with you. A gimmick is a report where it reads like a ledger, like an accounting ledger,
Yeah,
right? Here's the gene, here's your result, take this,
right.
right?
Yeah,
No, your body doesn't work like that.
exactly. So, and then the gotcha, as you said, are the things that are not driven by a provider. They're open to everyone accessing. You're going to get something, and then they're going to want to probably access your ancestors or other people along with it, right? So know before you test, know before you go between the gadget, the gimmick, and the gotcha on those. And definitely find a physician provider practitioner who knows what they're doing. And some of these companies also have referrals for providers. And some of the companies also, because then those folks have met a minimum standard of understanding and education and things like that. So I think that that's just really important.
I think I want to add to that too, that for your listeners, that if let's say your physician or provider is offering testing, ask them how long they were been trained.
Yeah.
Our training realistically is 18 to 24 months. I mean, maybe it's 12 months of hardcore didactics, but it's the practice and the exposure and the mentoring, the coaching. This is not, I went away for a weekend and took a course, or I went to such and such university offered by a lab. That doesn't count. It's hard work. And you'll see, because when you see a provider who does work in genomics, you should be able to walk out of that session saying, that person really understands me, and I now understand my body. The dots are connected, and I'm okay. This provider knows what they're doing, and
Right.
which is critical.
It is. And to the point of these tests, the genomic tests, they don't diagnose,
No,
not diagnostic.
no.
I had someone recently want to become a patient in my practice. And everybody who comes into my practice 100% gets a genomic test. So I don't have to guess anymore, right? Because a lot of times folks that come to see me have been around the block, they've seen everybody, still have things going on, and I don't want to guess anymore either.
No.
So that's how I do my work. And
Hmm.
and it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to do that. And I that's fine. It's just an offering in how I practice.
Me too.
And the person came back and said, well, their insurance company said that if you did a genomic test, we're going to cancel your insurance. Well, number one, I'm not sure that that conversation exactly occurred. I can't qualify that, but that's illegal in all 50 states to even say that. So that doesn't happen, can't happen. This data is encrypted. It's kept behind multiple walls. It's kept, way far away. We don't have to even include it in your medical record. There's lots of ways that it's literally protected, and privacy is one of the biggest things
Hmm.
with this.
And the other thing is, like you said, it's not diagnostic or predictive. What it does is it helps us inform the patterns of your body so we know how to generate the care plan and the support your unique biome and genome needs.
Right.
So that's, genomic testing versus genetic, right, which is a
Yeah.
single gene.
Yes.
And how that may impact a health outcome or a condition. We're looking at the whole puzzle, and each of the genes that we're looking at is responsive to lifestyle and intervention. So that's what's magical, what's brilliant about it. Yeah.
Exactly. So not diagnostic, safe
Mm-mm.
to have, privacy's involved. And then from there, I use that to inform me what tests I need,
Yeah,
right? And the tests show the real life, real time where the patient's at. In addition,
exactly.
in addition to their history, physical examination, and known medical history. So it's a very complex thing how we put this together. So, wrapping up and looking back at this full circle. So whether you're in your 20s, 30s, or already going through some around the perimenopausal waves and the whoop-de-whoops, it's really important to be empowered to know what's going on.
Hmm.
And your genes are going to inform you of the story, not written in stone, certainly in being able to be influenced, and written really in our choices, in our informed consent. And the DNA, while, is it our destiny? No, I don't know that it's our destiny. It's our starting point. It's
Hmm.
our interpretation point. It's our touchstone. It's our coming back to in terms of who we are. So how we eat, move, rest, all those lifestyle things can be influenced by and through our genes.
Hmm.
So if you were to just be put on the spot here, three takeaways, Amanda, about how we want to look at genomics reflected into menopause, that type of thing. What's the most important things, three most important things you would ever tell someone just coming and say, why would I want a genomic test? What do I need to know?
So is that the question? Why would I want a genomic test
Yeah,
specifically?
yeah,
To me, I think I think it's a human right. And before I die, I would like to see every person have the opportunity to have that blueprint at home or in front of their medical record, because it allows every person who touches your health in your life to reference how you're built. You don't change, your genes don't change. I mean, we can turn them on and off, manipulate them, but that is the story of you that you carry. And it can guide care for the rest of your life. All the way from pharmacogenomics to genomics, everything tells a story of you. And that's number one. Number two, it removes the guesswork out of why you may react to something, why you're experiencing something. And number three, it'll save you an awful lot of money, regardless of what life stage you're in, because you won't be taking wheelbarrows of supplements or foods that actually are not going to speak the same language of the intelligence of your body. So, and if we were going to look at a fourth for menopause, which, as you said, we didn't talk so much about it, but it's reflection as you move through your life stage. Some people may actually be in menopause in their mid-30s, just as a function of how their genes are a little fudgy or smudgy or what have you, or you've been experiencing poor sex hormone detoxification. Being able to see that earlier on in somebody's life, we're able to guide you or optimize your body so you don't end up, pinging or feeling miserable, or why do I feel this way, and how come somebody else just sailed through it, but I'm just stuck in this like vicious cycle and no one's helping me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get into particular cases, which, I can't count how many cases. I would say, I can't count how many cases of women I've gotten pregnant or what I mean is, we've sorted out their genes. We've sorted out what was, where they literally were at fertility clinics.
Oh, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we were able and they were, kind of, menopausal like ish,
Hmm.
how many issues can we put on there? And the cases where when we understand and look at their genes and then reflect testing upon that, we're able to rewrite the story more in line with really what's there and what the
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. The genes can help redirect the story. You can see where the traffic jams are in the body, or where you need like a detour.
right.
And that's what I mean by saving a whole bunch of money in testing, because genes will guide us to what may be the story. We're hearing that in symptoms in the story, but we can also validate it in the testing. Instead of like, I'm sure some of your listeners have gone through gobs of testing. It costs a lot of money
It
to
does.
make a mistake and not get the right information.
Yes.
Genomics allows us to get around that.
Yes. So how can people find you if they want more information to look at your work, see what you're doing, see how it might apply for them? What's the best way for them
See if
to?
they want to come to Europe on my next retreat. Yeah.
Exactly,
We're
exactly.
doing DNA guided retreats in Europe, so which is kind of neat. Genomic Kitchen, that's my Amanda Archibald, RD. I'll pop up on Google or whatever, but genomickitchen.com. That's
Okay,
me. Yeah.
right. Well, Amanda, this has been a rich conversation. It's been a long time coming. We're gonna have to do again, maybe not wait so long this next time. And I appreciate all your time and expertise and how you've walked us through this and joined me in conversation with this great topic. So thanks very much.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome.
Thanks.
All right, folks, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in our next episode. That's a wrap for this episode of the Dr. Mary Lauder podcast show. I hope you've heard something today that made you think, laugh, or say, well, now that was a plot twist I didn't expect. Just remember, your health journey is more than lab results and supplements. It's spirit, soul, and story, and sometimes a gadget or two you probably should have returned. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share our podcast with someone you love. If you didn't like the show, well, maybe don't tell anybody then. And if you want more soulful medicine, curious conversations, and tools that actually help, visit me anytime at drmarylauder.com. Until next time, stay kind and stay curious. Music today is provided by Mr. Dave Evans. He composed, played, and engineered this song specifically for our podcast, and it's called Soul Strings, an acoustic reflection of the healing path. Thanks, Dave. It's great music.